Hey, good afternoon, everybody. We're here on our home farm. I'm about to demonstrate top working a pecan tree. This is part of all the different agroforestry practices that we've implemented here on some of our other managed properties. Being able to top work trees that both volunteer in fields that have been strategically rested, or you're grafting onto trees that have reached a state of maturity that you planted really cheaply early on, and once those are at a certain height and vigor that are above, I guess we call the browsing level of our livestock, then we're coming in and grafting onto those. Now the ones that we planted are usually done in a sort of a keyline based alley. Everything we do is more or less a silvopasture. So they're planted in linear strips going across a landscape where we can sort of prep the ground, plant in either successional cover crops, or go ahead and plant out our priority tree species and woody crops with some companion nurse crops as well that we'll talk about later. In addition to silvopasture alleys, you can use more of a parkland model where trees kind of come up in a more scattered, random order, and you can kind of thin as needed to get the appropriate canopy cover over your open pastures. And these are typically, this is done trees that volunteer, so you're allowing a bit of rest for that to happen. Early on this farm, we actually planted out a parkland situation in open pasture, but each tree had to be protected with some sort of fixed fencing to keep the animals off that, and that's very time consuming and labor, and it costs money. So and here we are, like, planting transplanted mature pecan trees that come bare root in January. It's a very difficult time to plant it. The soils are really wet, plus the tree roots are not in great shape. A lot of the micro roots are damaged and missing, and so we've had a very, very low success. But at the same time, I'm watching this land, as we had a lot of rest early on, just the persimmons and the pecans just come back and volunteer. It's like, oh, why don't we just work with that and top work that and put selected genetics on those over time once they evolve. So the parkland is a great sort of model to work with, and that's what we're about to top work here. And you can see this field, there's other more mature pecan trees that we've grafted. Again, these are all just open pollinated natural seedlings that have come up in here. And you can see the overall state. This is mid-June in Piedmont, North Carolina. This is one of our bottomland pastures. This farm is rested throughout the spring, and then our lambs our ram lambs are weaned from our leased property, and they come here and we finish out both our ram lambs and our ewe lambs through the mid-late summer through the fall, early winter. And so all this sort of succession that advances during that time, which is great for ecosystem processes, creating wildlife habitat, all this sort of gets hammered back down. All this above ground biomass gets converted into organic matter on the soil, or into dung and urine that's feeding this whole ecosystem. So the first thing that I do is really just kind of come in and I'll cut out what's below the tree, just trying to open up some airflow. Like I said, animals haven't been in here. Usually if they had, a lot of this have been grazed down, or they, nice thing about silvopasture situations, the animals will love to bed down for shade under the tree, which also pushes a lot of the grass and weeds down around the trunk to help open up the trunk for airflow and moisture and things that could cause problems on the trunk of your tree, which is certainly a challenge here in the humid southeast. So I'm gonna go ahead and I use, this is a very popular tool. I don't know, you'd call it a miner's axe. It's a small little chopping axe with a bell hook. Just sort of use a scythe sort of sharpening stone, and just sort of, this is a really popular tool I use for just doing really coarse cuts on things around the farm that I'm not concerned about having a clean cut or need to heal over like I would on a fruit or a nut tree. So I'm just go ahead and knock these things back real quick and before I set up to graft. So I certainly could have done that with a mechanical weed eater with a blade, or brought out equipment and mowed this field down. But you know, what's nice about doing lots of little cuts over a period of time is it's good exercise. You get good skill with different tools, and you know, it's just the way I do it. But all right, so this being a pecan, there's about 3 main southern pecan cultivars that we're grafting this year. One's the Pawnee, and the 2 others are Lakota and Kanza, and both of these were selected for just kind of a low input cultivar. It doesn't need a lot of spraying. It's got good resistance to scab and pest, and because this is a very low input agroforestry orchard situation, so we need things that don't take a lot of inputs. And the Pawnee is a type 1 pecan that pollinates well with those other 2. We already have some of those here on the farm, and they're also more of a shorter, smaller pecan at maturity that fits in well with the density of plantings here, trying to get as much going on 20 acres and kind of keeping things to about a 30, 40, maximum 50% shaded canopy over our property. So I'm gonna go ahead, and first thing I'm gonna do is prepare the scion for grafting. So I'm just gonna go ahead and give you all a snapshot of the different tools that I'm using for this grafting method, which is sort of I think it's called the Texas Bark Inlay method. And the main items really we're working with here, like I said, here's my scion already cut to size. Then I've got, I'm gonna wrap that with some grafting tape. This helps seal up the scion to keep moisture in while it is fusing with the tree, keeping it from drying out. I've got a couple sizes of masking tape that I do to sort of tape it up. I've got grafting wax that actually goes on before the tape, also help seal in the wound and the graft. I use a couple different sizes of grafting nails depending on the size of the scion to nail the scion to the tree to help keep it stable. Rubbing alcohol to just kind of disinfect and clean up grafting wax, which can get kind of sticky. I have my grafting knife, the hammer obviously for nailing the scion to the rootstock, and then I use a specialty marker and tree tag so I can label the cultivars and ultimately put a more permanent label on that tree or catalog it so I can know what it is for future reference. So you'll have a lot of different size scion depending on what you're cutting, and I usually select these based on the girth, the caliper, I guess, of the rootstock tree I'm grafting onto. And let me first explain too, there's a lot of different types of grafting methods that you can use, certainly depending on the species, the time of the year, the size of the rootstock or your plant stock, or you can do budding grafts or budding propagation. So what we're doing, and what I've sort of has worked best for me for doing bark grafts, grafting here in the growing season, where I'm taking dormant scion wood that's cut in January through early February. That's kept in cold storage, and then really you can start field grafting when the bark starts slipping, so sap is starting to run back up into the tree. Now we usually don't wait. Usually it's about May before we start grafting here, and can pretty much graft all the way into July. So we got a pretty decent window to work with. So I try to get as much as I can out of the scion, and I'm kind of looking for about two buds above my grafting point. So what I'll do is start from the bottom, and I usually just cut off the bottom of the scion just to get some fresh wood. And depending on the size, this, I would be looking for maybe up to 2 inches of the scion that's actually going to be cut and grafted to the cambium of the rootstock, and leaving about two high buds. So actually I got 1 here, 1 and 2. I could really work with this right here. So I'm actually going to go ahead and just cut it at an angle just above the second bud from the bottom. Set that aside, go ahead and make another one. Got 1, here's my second. This works out pretty good. I can get 3 out of this stick. So, and then I'm gonna go ahead and top that one out there.
Okay.
All right, so to wrap up the scion, I'm gonna start sort of above inch or inch and a half above the bottom. Oop. Sort of get that thing, sort of work my way, stretching the tape around the scion. Gonna wrap the top and then sort of work my way back down. I'll add some wax on top of that later. We'll do one more real quick. Just sort of a side note, it's good to sort of, I keep this on a string. If I'm doing a bunch at once, I'll hang it around my neck. You definitely don't want to get this damaged and dented, which would kind of ruin the whole tape and weaken it. So right here I've got the two buds I'm working with. I'm going to get this, start here at the bottom. That thing stretched out. I'm gonna go ahead and use 2 on here, which I'm not above doing that. Especially as you get, excuse me, in the later part of the summer. The spring rains stop coming. Now, if you go and you can certainly find other instructional methods on the internet on how to do this grafting method, and in Texas, A&M has some good instructional videos, and the nursery where we got actually this scion from, because we didn't have these cultivars locally, they'll actually use other materials like aluminum foil and plastic bags to help seal that the graft and keep moisture in. Now those are both more drier, hotter climates. I think preserving moisture is more critical, but I was taught sort of, this is basically a combination of different methods that I've learned from others. So I've been able to get by perfectly well with just the grafting tape, the masking tape, and using the grafting wax. So once those are prepared, I'm actually going to go ahead and I cut the tree first, prepare that before I opened up my scion. I want to have that open as little as possible before we start to graft it onto the tree. So, with this sort of technique, it's nice to sort of keep some bottom branches to sort of allow the tree to continue to photosynthesize and put energy into the growth while the graft is forming. I am putting the graft on my central leader, but I also at the same time don't want a lot of branches taller than that and competing for that as the central leader, because the new graft that I'm doing will be pruned to be that new central leader on the pecan. So, but also want to stay high enough that the sheep aren't going to sort of damage it. So I could potentially come in right here, make the graft with this size. I could easily get two, if not 3 scion on there, but that's fine for 2. I think the reason I do multiple ones is to sort of help that that wound heal up. So the larger the wound, the more area that you have for that's required for healing, and it's more susceptible to rot and damage and infection. So by adding the other scions onto it, we can get more area healing, and I can always cut those extra scions out later. And that's assuming you got 100% survivability. But you should once you refine your techniques close to it. Or we can sort of prune those into side scaffolds and branches for use as part of that tree. And then the bottom scaffolds can get cut later. But ultimately in this system where we're trying to really keep the open and around the bottom of the trunk, I will be cutting these out later, and I sort of want my bottom scaffolds really at like eye height or whatnot. At least I can easily get by with a tractor, if we're clipping these fields once a year, every other year or so. So I'm gonna go ahead and use just a handsaw and make a cut. I think in this case, just for demonstration, I'll go ahead and just do it down here for now. So the next thing I'm going to do is sort of pick the sides where I'm going to put my two grafts, and I'm looking for, where possible, sort of a flatter edge of my rootstock, and you can kind of see it's flat here, here, and here. Also consider sometimes if I'm just doing one, where the prevailing winds might be. So I would want the scion to push into the tree. In this case, we're pretty well protected down in this bottomland, and I'm going to do two. I'm not too concerned about it. What I want to do is often I'll kind of just sort of shave up the bark if it's pretty gnarly and rough. That just is easier to work with. So we'll just start with that one there. And then I just sort of just shave off just the top edge to kind of get a clean surface to work with. So, all right. All right. Ready? All right. Now I got my scion, and I'm looking for a straight, smooth edge, right? Because when I'm making the graft in here, I want to have two straight lines. It makes it easy and a nice even line to graft to. But I'm also then looking for the side of the top bud, which I'm hoping will be my new central leader. So it's on this side. I'm gonna flip it around, and I'm gonna go ahead and cut this side off. I'm gonna make a nice smooth cut. We're going about halfway through the scion. That looks good there. You want to have a nice smooth straight edge, and I do a back cut real carefully right on this collar. And that is about it.
Okay.
All right, we got a nice smooth cut halfway through the scion. Now I'm gonna go ahead and do just a quick wedge cut. That helps me sort of slide this down into the bark. And then I just kind of rough up the sides just to sort of expose that cambium. So what we're trying to do is line up the cambium layer of this thin bark with the cambium layer of this thick bark. So I'm gonna lay this up against the tree. This is real easy to do when you're standing on the ground. I just go ahead and mark both sides of this, right? Just carefully without slicing any of my rootstock bark. All right, that's done. Flip the knife around, slide that in right against that line, and just sort of push in. Now I'm careful about, you can shoot for perpendicular, but better yet, you can kind of be angled into it. So that's a better way to secure that the cambium will line up. You don't want to be angled away from the graft, because that's more likely that the cambiums won't line up. So I've got that one. Let me go ahead and find the next one here, line it, push in, and I'm just go ahead and pop that bark out like that. All right, this gets slid right down into there, and then I'm gonna go ahead and grab a nail and connect that. All right, this is a bit bigger scion, so I'm going to use a 17 gauge steel nail. Just go ahead and pop that there. Grab some grafting wax. We're going to seal up that wound. Just dab it all on both sides, around the top. That's good. And I'll just sort of wrap another bit just around this collar. And if I got any left over, I just sort of make sure I get a little bit just on that exposed tip there. I'm using about a 3/4 inch masking tape. And you don't want painter's tape. It's too, not sticky enough. I was also advised to use the 3M brand. You don't want the cheap stuff because you want it to last as far as possible. But what we're doing is just wrapping the collar of this to really protect it. 2 to 3, sort of what I end up doing. That's there. Let's do a third. Towel. All right, so that one's ready. Since we're doing another one, we're not going to wrap the top yet. So once I have those two grafts in there, I use a thicker tape. You don't have to. It goes faster. You get more continuous coverage. Sort of seal up the top. I did sort of wipe some of the wax over the top wound. Just one more on the top. Okay. Then I go ahead and just wrap all that. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and prepare a label. The only other thing I would say, I think, is that pecans, I've not noticed it, but say if you're in the middle of a wet spell, or you have a really fast growing tree, say if you graft like mulberry, is it's nice to give a few relief cuts at the bottom to let some of the extra, you know, sap and moisture relief. Otherwise, it's all going to want to come out of this wound, and it can really kind of blow out your graft. So I'm going to just go ahead and just make two sort of quick cuts, just barely an eighth or so of an inch into the trunk, so you would get, you know, relief at that point down there. And you just kind of have to keep an eye on this. You know, if this thing breaks dormancy too soon, like if you're starting to see this thing bud out within a week, it's probably going to fail. You really want to see this thing really starting to bud out and take off, you know, 3-4 weeks. If it's a month and a half from now, it's probably not going to do well. Sometimes it will bud out and then fail. It just never really formed the proper graft. But you'll want to kind of come in and also just rub off any of the new buds that are gonna come off from about any growing point on this tree, just to kind of keep the energy focused on here, and really just, you know, eventually these will come down. So I've noticed, you know, just this year, the persimmons, you know, really successful with those, and those are taking off a lot sooner. The pecans, they take a little bit longer to sort of really take off and start growing. So just keep an eye on them, and if you got too much growth too quickly, sometimes you ought to cut those back in the season a bit, so it doesn't become too top heavy, and you know, it topples over and blows out the whole thing. So this isn't really necessarily a set it and forget it exercise. You do need to kind of routinely come back and check on it, but you know, considering that we're basically grafting, you know, an improved cultivar on a tree that was basically cost us nothing. We didn't plant this just volunteered, and it's about as healthy as you can get. You know, transplanting bigger trees, they are gonna not have as long and healthy of a lifespan on average. So there's nothing really healthier than working with the tree that's growing from where it originally germinated as a seed.